Hello, I'm Sergio Lurio, and welcome to our discussion of a unique aspect of aero-philately, namely the use of Winchester security paper in the production of a series of Venezuelan airmail stamps of the 1930s. This was the only time that Winchester security paper was used for airmail stamps in the world. Venezuela also issued a definitive series using Winchester security paper, but it was short-lived in the postage history of Venezuela. The first airmail issue in 1930 consisted of 16 stamps featuring a map of Venezuela with an airplane flying overhead. The stamps were printed on plain white paper. In 1932, Venezuela issued the same 16 airmail stamps, but using Winchester security paper instead of plain white paper. Notice the dramatic color change for the 1.7 Bolivar from a dark blue to a dark orange. In 1934, Venezuela issued 8 additional denominations, also using Winchester security paper. These included the 70 centimos, the 1.8 Bolivar, the 1.95 Bolivar, the 2.0 Bolivar, the 3.0 Bolivar, the 4.0 Bolivar, the 5.0 Bolivar, and the 8.0 Bolivar. This was the first and only time that Winchester security paper was used for airmail postage stamps anywhere in the world. In mint, unhinged condition, this set is surprisingly expensive. On June 12, 1937, due to shortages of the lower values, 6 of the higher valued Winchesters were overprinted and used for a 3-week period. Their release was intended as a stopgap measure until the issuance of the next series of airmail stamps on July 1, 1937. Winchester security paper was used one other time for postal purposes in Venezuela's 1932 Simon Bolivar's definitive issue. Further complicating the matter of Winchester stamps was the use of the 22.5 centavos Simon Bolivar stamp as an overprinted airmail stamp in 1946. Beginning on July 1, 1937, a completely new set of airmail stamps were introduced to replace the Winchesters. For some unknown reason, the Venezuelans issued postage in large numbers of denominations using the same design. The 1871 Escuela issue is a good example of this. This practice continued well into the introduction of airmail stamps in 1930. Tradition, therefore, potentially explains the 16 denominations used in the 1930 airmail issue. Even though we're focused on the Winchesters, I begin with a cover using stamps from the 1930 set. Here, the sender or the post office decided to frank the cover with numerous stamps totaling 100 centimos, equaling 1 Bolivar, when a single 1 Bolivar stamp from either the 1930 or 1932 issue could have been used. Mailed from Maracaibo to the Gulf Oil Company in Bogota, Colombia, in 1932, the sender may have been a philatelist at heart. Venezuela was plagued with postal stamp forgeries beginning with its first 1859 issue. It wasn't long after the introduction of the 1930 airmail issue that forgeries of it also began to appear. To curb forgeries, Venezuelan officials used Winchester security paper for the 1932 to 1934 airmail issue. The notable security feature of the Winchesters was the wavy blue arcs embedded in the paper. In 1934, Venezuelan officials introduced an expanded set of Winchester stamps by 8 new values. Why the addition of these 8 new values is unknown to me. Promises had been advanced by postal officials that Venezuelan printers would be included as printers of the security paper stamps. As later transpired, the Winchester paper was only made available to the Waterloo and Sons printer in England. This led to a minor political fracas among Venezuelan printers. However, the decision to adopt Winchester paper failed to consider the visual acuity needed by postal clerks. For all intents and purposes, the 10 centimos is particularly indistinguishable because of its yellow color. Further, the same problem applies to the gray 15 centimos stamp. These two covers show the difficulty faced by the postal clerks. I will touch briefly upon all denominations in the Winchester airmail set and, where feasible, how they were used. The small supply of the Winchester paper resulted in the relatively small number of all Winchesters printed, leading to stamp shortages in local post offices during its 5-year cycle. 300,000 of the 5 centimos were produced. This denomination amounted to less than 1.5 cents United States. It found heavy usage on envelopes as a make-up rate, but it could not be singly used for airmail except in questionable instances. One such instance is this favor cover, and sent to members of the Bolivian Stamp Association via the association newsletter. As a favor, the cover was franked with only the 5 centimos value and canceled in Maracaibo with an auxiliary marking affixed. While not a counterfeit, this cover is bogus as no such airmail service existed. Here's an instance of the 5 centimos used as a makeup stamp to complete a 3.2 Bolivar franking to Germany. Specimen stamps are available, but I can only show the 10 centimo stamp courtesy of Mark Silverman. 100 specimens in green were produced. The specimen's color matched the green of other Winchesters. Consequently, the color of the final 10 centimos release was changed to yellow. A total of 300,000 were produced. All denominations below 70 centimos could only be used for makeup purposes. This reflected that there were no airmail destinations for singular use of the stamps below 70 centimos. The yellow 10 centimos on this cover is indiscernible. It is paired with a 1930 issue airmail stamp. The 15, 25, and 40 centimos denominations were used for makeup purposes and printed in quantities of 390,000 15 centimo stamps, 330,000 25 centimo stamps, and 300,000 40 centimo stamps. Like the yellow 10 centimo stamp, the gray 15 centimos proved also to be indiscernible. This cover exemplifies this fact. The right two stamps are in fact a pair of 15 centimo stamps, though even under close examination, it is very difficult to see their values. Here you can see the values using computer image enhancement. With the normal rate of 70 centimos to Colombia, why does this cover pay 1.3 bolivars? It is also not unusual to see paired 40 centimos issues. Their total of 80 centimos matched with the 1 bolivar that made up the 1.8 bolivar rate to the United States. The 70 centimos value was the most frequently produced denomination, with 1,450,000 produced. Few 70 centimos are seen used singly. 70 centimos was the lowest foreign rate for Venezuelan airmail, for use on mail bound for either Colombia or Curaçao, Aruba. Notably, in the set there were no 45, 50, 55, 60, or 65 centimos stamps released. Here's a cover that reads as if it is ship mail rather than airmail. It was, in fact, airmail having been flown from Caracas to Maracaibo to the offices of the Lago Petroleo Company on board the SS Suriname. The 70 centimos could also easily be used as a make-up stamp with others to total 1.8 bolivars for the franking required for mail to the United States. There are a total of 375,075 centimos stamps produced. The blue Winchester paper at times made it appear reddish rather than its bright orange color. An auxiliary marking was applied indicating that the envelope had originated in Maracaibo, bound for the United States, but the cover had also been serviced in Caracas. Why? Specifically, the nation's contribution to the worldwide anti-malarial eradication effort was based in Caracas, where this arrival marking was applied on the reverse side. In some cases, despite the make-up stamps, franking was insufficient. This is a piece of internal domestic airmail from San Fernando Apure to Caracas. It had to be shipped per the manuscript instruction, Evapol, in the upper left corner as ordinary mail by ship. Also on the cover is the manuscript instruction, por insuficiencia de franquero se cursa la vía ordinaria, which translates to, due to insufficient postage, the ordinary route is taken. The rate to Germany by airmail was 1.9 bolivars. Instead, only 1.1 bolivars in postage was affixed. In effect, this is a jusqu'à cover, meaning that it was carried only so far by one method of transit before being transferred to another method. The only indicators that this cover was flown is the Aeropostal Venezolana marking and the airmail border. This airline was wholly owned by Venezuelans and was not a part of the better-known French company Aeropostal, which flew internationally. The 1 bolivar denomination amounted to approximately 25 cents in U.S. currency. 450,000 1 bolivar stamps were produced. It is seldom seen used singly, but in this case it was applied to a number 10 business correspondence letter from Maracaibo to the South American Gulf Oil Company in Bogota, Colombia. The most frequently observed use of the 1 bolivar value was for correspondence paired with other Winchester stamps to the United States, as shown. Smaller quantities of Winchesters began to be ordered with the 1.2 bolivar denomination. 95,000 copies were produced. In consequence, few are known to have been used singly. However, the 1.2 bolivar could be used for make-up rates. Assuming that a normal envelope's rate paid 1.8 bolivars to the United States, this cover proves the exception to the rule, in that an oversized envelope paid 3.2 bolivars franking. The 3.2 bolivar franking has been observed on 3 similarly sized covers in 1934. This suggests that size, weight, or distance explains the higher 3.2 bolivar rate to the United States. The 1.7 bolivar issue was the perfect complement for the distinctively yellow 10 centimos issue for mail to the United States. This cover was flown by Pan American Airways from Caracas to New York City. This cover illustrates a self-made airmail envelope used in 1934. It bears the coat of arms cancellation of the city of Caracas. The number 9 size envelope illustrated here shows 2 differences from other 1.8 and 3.2 bolivar covers to the United States, namely size and the 1.95 bolivar franking. The 1.8 bolivar denomination was one of the few Winchesters that could be used to pay the standard rate to a single country, namely the United States. 1.8 bolivars equaled 45 cents in U.S. currency. 500,000 copies of the 1.8 bolivar were produced, making this denomination the third most numerous of the Winchesters. Numerous uses of the 1.8 bolivar on cover can be found. Here are two covers of the United States using the single 1.8 bolivar. The bottom example clearly shows a Caracas arms cancel. Examples of double-franked 1.8 bolivar covers to the United States are difficult to explain. The envelope shows no evidence of expansion to accommodate heavy materials. The oversized envelope may explain the double franking. Franking for this Parisian-bound cover totaled 2 bolivars. The piece was never opened. Why it paid 5 centimos more than the usual rate of 1.95 bolivars remains questionable. The 1.9 bolivar denomination is seldom seen on cover. It had a total print run of 45,000 stamps. Sandwiched in between the 1.9 and 2 bolivars were the 120,000 stamps of the 1.95 value. The 1.95 bolivar is most frequently seen used by itself on correspondence to Europe. In this example, 1.95 bolivars paid for the rate to Germany. The additional franking of 2 25 centimos stamps paid for certification. On the other hand, a 1.95 bolivar perfin, short for perforated initial, was used on this official government correspondence. The NG stands for Nacional Gobierno. Mail from Caracas, the piece was registered to ensure its delivery to its destination in New York City. The parallel purple lines indicate that the mail was to be carried by one means of transportation before being shuttled to another form of transportation. In other words, it is a jusqu'à cover. A question here is why this is a jusqu'à cover when the proper airmail franking of 1.95 bolivar was used. A total of 120,000 of the 2 bolivar denomination were produced. What airmail rate it matched is unclear. After the 2.0 bolivar, limited quantities of high denominations were produced. Since Venezuela was the largest exporter of oil in the world by 1930, it is surprising that so few of these higher value stamps were issued. In this instance, a single 2 bolivar stamp was applied on correspondence from Maracaibo to Germany. Possibly, the 1.95 bolivar denomination was unavailable to the sender, and the 2 bolivar was used as a substitute. 35,000 copies were produced of the 2.1 bolivar denomination. In this example, the largely undecipherable 15 centimos value contributed to the 2.25 bolivars paid for the proper airmail rate to Uruguay. In this instance, we have a cover that is franked in the unusual amount of 4.55 bolivars for a censored piece to New York City just before the United States entry into World War II. 45,000 stamps were produced of the 2.3 bolivar denomination. This example originated from Ciudad Bolivar bound for Switzerland. Why the increased franking of the cover to 2.4 bolivars is unclear. However, the background of the envelope may provide a clue. It bears an airplane and the words mensajero, which can be translated in English to money order message. The 2.5 bolivar denomination had a total run of 45,000 stamps. Finding the 2.5 bolivar cover is difficult. The 3 bolivar denomination had 95,000 stamps printed. This cover to Guatemala paid 3.15 bolivars in 1935. Likewise, 3.15 bolivars were also paid on this cover to New York in 1937. Based on anecdotal information, a Pan-American agreement worked out with the Organization of American States may have accounted for the rate increase to the United States from 1.8 bolivars. The 3.7 bolivar denomination was issued in 25,000 stamps. Other covers to Chile in the amount of 3.7 bolivars suggest that this was the airmail rate to Chile. In this instance, the stamp is a perfin stamp. Despite its designation as an official government release, the Venezuelan Ministry of Public Works had to affix the perfin and pay for registration and certification. The 4 bolivar denomination totaled 45,000 produced. In this seldom seen mixed franc example, the explanation for its use lies in the fact that it helped pay for the relatively expensive mailing to Paris through Natal, Brazil, amounting to 12.15 bolivars on a likely aero-postal flight. The 5 bolivar denomination was printed on 65,000 stamps. Having not seen any on cover, it is suspected that many were used on parcel post, either singly or to complement other Winchesters. A relatively low number of the 8 bolivar denomination, amounting to less than 20,000 stamps, were printed. Shown earlier, this seldom seen mixed franc example paid for the relatively expensive mailing to Paris through Natal, Brazil, amounting to 12.15 bolivars on a likely aero-postal flight. The 10 bolivar denomination had a production run of 35,000 stamps, while the 20 bolivar denomination had a production of 16,000 stamps. If used at all, they were likely applied to parcel post packages. At the beginning, I noted the Venezuelan tendency in the issuance of large numbers of denominations. This appears to explain why these 2 denominations, along with many others, were printed. 6 overprinted Winchesters were released on June 4, 1937. These were a stopgap measure released as a prelude to the new aviation series of July 1, 1937, that replaced the Winchesters. Overprints were needed to make up for shortages in lower denominations. Surprisingly, even then, few overprints were made available or manufactured. 10,000 each of the revalued 5 and 10 centimos on the 1.7 and 3.7 bolivars. 15,000 each of the revalued 15 and 25 centimos on the 4 and 5 bolivars, and 5,000 of the 2 bolivars on the 2.1 bolivars. The most severely affected of the Winchesters was the 2.1 bolivar issue. Of its original production of 35,000 stamps, 5,000 were used for overprinting. This left only 30,000 of the 2.1 denominations. This was a 14% reduction of the original total. During their 3 weeks of existence, these overprints were used, but can be difficult to find. Here's an example of all 6 overprints used on cover to one destination. Specifically, this is an official Governor of Zulia envelope bound for Curacao. I have found 3 such distinct covers. This cover is an interesting pairing of the regular 70 centimos Winchester and the overprinted 10 centimos Winchester stamps. With its small production, lack of use, and an apparent surplus, the 5 bolivar made for a prime candidate for revaluation. It was revalued to 25 centimos before the introduction of Venezuela's July 1937 airmail set. In this example, the 4 bolivar was revalued to 15 centimos and paired with the 3 bolivar Winchester to make up the 3.15 rate to the United States on June 12, 1937. In 1947, a set of 5 overprinted airmail stamps were released. One of these was a 22.5 centimos Simon Bolivar stamp from the 1932 Winchester definitive set. Both the airmail and the definitive Winchester had been removed from service in 1937. In 1947, postal authorities decided to use some of the surplus 22.5 centimos Simon Bolivar stamps for airmail purposes. The surplus 22.5 centimos found new life as an airmail stamp when overprinted JRG aero-philately BS 10, 1946, and released in January of 1947. Its use on cover commemorates the end of Venezuela's Winchester legacy. This brings me to the end of my discussion of the Venezuelan Winchester airmails. It's a unique airmail series based on the use of Winchester security paper, as well as its use of numerous denominations that seem to have no apparent purpose other than tradition. Thank you for your time and attention.